The Czechs have been successful at the top of international football, precisely 4 of them that made up the 1976 European Championship squad. Since the dissolution of Czechoslovakia, not so much. Except for 2 glorious summers that straddled the new millennium so delicately. This is a story of a new age of Czech football of 1996 and 2004, the outsiders of Europe's Twin Peaks. History_lesson.exe launch. Czechoslovakia were swept up in an interwar wave of successful Central European football alongside Austria and Hungary. Of those 3, they'd be the first to qualify for the World Cup final in 1934, where they lost to Italy. Whilst they wouldn't return to the World Cup until 1958 and bombed out of the group, they left with an impact, shagging Argentina 6-1 and imposing an entire new footballing outlook on the South Americans. Then the Golden Age led by Josef Masopust. First a European Championship semi-final in 1960, as well as a Central European International Cup, which was arguably as impressive, before a grand return to the World Cup final where they were swept aside by the Brazilians of Vava and Garrincha. The Ballon d'Or winner, Josef Masopust, might have been only one because only Europeans could win it in them days, but small consolation nonetheless. They wouldn't win a tournament game until the one lonely Czechoslovakian island in a sea of desperate near misses, 1976. And in this, a video about Czech football, it couldn't truly be classed as a Czech success, considering that of the 22 players in the squad, 18 of them were Slovakian. This the tournament you'll remember even if you hadn't come out of the womb yet, when Antonin Panenka created a new way to embarrass a goalkeeper from the penalty spot. Panenka, ironically enough, one of the 4 Czechs selected, the winner of the European Championships. Other Czechs also included semi-final goal scorers Zdeněk Nehoda and František Vesely, but in Jan Švelik and Karol Debajus, Slovakian goal scorers in the final that overturned a 2-goal West German deficit. Both states of the nation, therefore, more than played their part. There were other successes. The gold medal at the Moscow Olympics of 1980 against East Germany, this still in that era of shamitourism, which was no surprise that those teams would also be joined by Yugoslavia and Soviet Union in making up the semi-finals, other countries where it was still officially illegal to be a professional footballer. It should be no surprise that a Czechoslovakian team wouldn't grace the European Championships after 1980, when they claimed a bronze medal that sounds good until you stare at a dog-shit format in the face, and then it becomes less impressive. They'd returned from the Spain World Cup of '82 without a win, having to wait until Italia 90 to win their first World Cup fixture since the 1962 semi-final against Yugoslavia. The triumphs over Austria, United States and Costa Rica, as well as a quarter-final in a cosy part of the draw, would prove the last dance of Czechoslovakia on the world stage. It was always going to be the case when the wheels of outside forces were already in motion. The Berlin Wall hadn't been fully deconstructed when the Velvet Revolution took place in late November '89, and by December the 10th, the first non-communist government in 41 years took control of the country. Boiling complicated Central European politics down in the early 1990s, Slovakian politicians quite liked being together, whereas Czech politicians wanted to split up. Public opinion was right down the middle as ever, and despite that, the first sunrise of 1993 would witness 2 separate nations, Czech Republic and Slovakia. Just what would that mean for Czech football? But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, the absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bargain, here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free. See it like Manchester City buying Citigroup players for a knockdown price. 2. You can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected, just buy them all up and protect them. 3. You can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. Semantics, here we go. The Czechs were now called the Czech Republic, and the first match under that banner was a February 1994 friendly against Turkey. A 4-1 win followed by a 6-1 thumping of Malta in a Euro 96 qualifier hinted that the Czechs would be just fine on their own. Drawn alongside Luxembourg, Belarus, Norway and the Netherlands as well for one automatic spot, it was going to be competitive. Win your home games, draw your away games against your rivals was going to be the successful maxim. After defeating Malta at home, keeping 2 clean sheets and 2 goalless draws to end 94 sounded like a good idea. Except one of those results was away in Malta. Either side of the summer of 95, the Czechs laid down their marker. A second half comeback against the Dutch in April and a nerve-shredding 2-goal triumph over Norway the September. It was crucial in reeling in the Norwegians. Now fate was almost in Czech hands. 5 points behind Norway with 2 profitable games against Belarus and Luxembourg meant that qualification could be achieved. 5 goals without conceding combined with Norway's late capitulation in Rotterdam confirmed Czech Republic's spot in England. In a pool featuring Germany, Spain, Italy, France, Netherlands, Portugal and with England as hosts, nobody gave Czech Republic much of a chance. Even Romania and Bulgaria were coming off decent World Cups. Nobody knew what to expect from a potentially dangerous Croatia and maybe even Russia. Denmark were reigning champions and could also be strong. Then you had the Czechs on a short list of no-hopers alongside Turkey, Scotland and Switzerland. Even more so when the names got pulled from the hat. Germany, Italy and Russia, 3 former champions sharing the group with the Czechs. Vladimir Smicer echoed these thoughts, booking his wedding in for after the group stages. He said, "Dark horses, that would mean that people thought we could win, but let's be honest, nobody thought the little Czech team would beat the best." Most of the names are now synonymous with 90s European football, but back in 96, just 7 played outside of Czech borders. This included Newcastle United's Pavel Srnicek, the captain Václav Němeček, and a gaggle playing in the Bundesliga, headed by Patrick Berger. You've got your Karol Poborský and Vladimir Smicer of Slavia Prague, as well as Sparta's Pavel Nedved. All 23 or 24 years of age, they would be the 3 names inextricably linked to Euro 96. Preparations by today's standards look to be amateur. Booked to play at Old Trafford and Anfield, the Czech camp was based out of Preston. What better to line up against players like Mateusz Sammer, Enrico Chiesa and Andrej Kanchelskis than to warm up against local side Bamber Bridge. 9-1, the Czechs were barely lukewarm at Old Trafford when a German barrage ended with first half goals from Christian Ziege and Andy Muller. On the back of the limp performance, Ruud Gullit's punditry was understandable when he said that the Czechs would be on the first plane home. It couldn't have been further off the mark. 5 days later at Anfield, Czech Republic had a stick or twist kind of game with Italy. In international football, you need a big lump of luck, probably more so than in the club game. Czech Republic had Arrigo Sacchi to thank for a lot of the summer of 96 when he changed the majority of his midfield and attack. Out were Zola, Casaraghi, Del Piero, Di Matteo and De Livio from the first game. In were Ravanelli, Chiesa, Fusa, Dino Baggio and Donadoni. With that in mind, it should be no surprise that it took Czech Republic just 5 minutes to find the lead in Liverpool. The deserved opener seemed to matter for shit all when Enrico Chiesa equalised and Czech fury only doubled when they should have been awarded a penalty. That relented quite quickly when Radek Babel returned his country to the lead, and they were there to stay. It was almost a shootout for qualification because of just how UEFA had changed their tiebreaker. After their second matches, Czech Republic and Italy were tied on 3 points, but the Italians had a neutral goal difference and the Czechs a negative one. Yet, Czech Republic were above the Italians for as long as their points were tied, due to the head-to-head record. So long as Russia didn't beat Czech Republic at Anfield, the Czechs just had to match Italy's result in their third game against Germany. And Czech Republic met a Russian team that had well and truly run their race. They needed so much to go their way to gain qualification, and within 19 minutes they looked down and out. 2 goals to the good, Czech Republic could surely ease off the gas, kick back and prepare for the quarter-final. A quarter-final, we should add, which would be played against the so-called weakest group, featuring either Portugal or Croatia. On reputation, a comparative breeze compared to Germany or Italy. Maybe one eye lazily drifted towards that match at Villa Park in the quarter-final. Czech Republic chucked in 2 goals before a third fell on 85 minutes. News from Old Trafford had been eerily silent up until this point. Italy and Germany were heading towards a barnstorming classic of a 0-0 draw. But as it stood, Italy were tiptoeing beyond Czech Republic and into that quarter-final in Birmingham. The Czechs had 5 minutes to find something, and this crazy match found one more twist in the tale. Russia still needed another goal and was still equipped with the hope that Germany would find something against Italy. So they continued to attack for that 4th goal, hoping that Germany would do them a solid and see them into the quarter-final. They attacked, and there was a 6th goal in the match, but it came from the counter-attacking Czechs and via Vladimir Smicer, who, thanks to the goal, now had to postpone his wedding, and it wouldn't be the last time. After they had seen off Croatia, Portugal was the Czech reward in front of just 26,832 at Villa Park. They had presumably witnessed 2 pretty drab quarter-finals that ended with 0 goals and penalty shootouts the prior day. For a tournament that has so many rose-tinted spectacles stapled to it, the previous 2 points make it quite possibly the most misremembered tournament alongside Italia 90. The English public were only really interested in seeing England play at Wembley and the odd game featuring Scotland or Germany. That can happen at tournaments and doesn't really impact things on the pitch, but the sheer risk-averse football being played in the knockouts surely dampened the spectacle. After Germany beat Croatia in a captivating game earlier on in the day, the Czechs and Portuguese were up last, with the neutral hope being for a replication of another decent football game. We got none of that, and we weren't even treated to the spectacle of a penalty shootout thanks to one of the more beautiful Euros goals scored in a match that really didn't deserve it. You've all seen it. Karol Poborski's lob on 53 minutes that split the teams. I'll let it run a few times here so you can sink it in before we move on. June 26th was earmarked for both semi-finals, which started naturally with Czech Republic's return to Old Trafford to meet France. It was an apathetic match played in front of apathetic supporters and broadcast on televisions in the UK at least to an apathetic nation more intent on pre-drinking for the final before the final that was England versus Germany later that day. Des Lynam summed up Europe as a whole when he remarked, "We are unthrilled, but hey, at least we got a penalty shootout out of it." Across 2 hours of football, Yuri Djorkaeff was the only man remotely close to breaking any kind of deadlock when he struck the post. Dusan Urin was contented to play his pragmatic football, which had suddenly invaded the Czech game in the knockouts. As soon as it was clear that the Czechs could actually try and win the tournament, they had shut up shop and played risk-free. Vladimir Smicer wasn't on the pitch by the time the penalties were taken, but his brothers scored 6 from 6, making the ordeal of postponing his wedding for a second time a little bit worthwhile. The Czechs were through to the final courtesy of Petr Kuba's save off Reynald Pedros. 4 days until the biggest day in Czech football since their last final with Germany 20 years prior. Urin allowed some of his players to carry out their family duties. For one, Smicer finally got married and Michal Hornak went home for the birth of his child. They will both be back for the final. Whilst 4 changes were made, it is unclear if coach Urin implemented the Czech president's preferred lineup which was sent over in advance of the game. Returning from suspensions were Radek Babel and Jan Sukoperek, whilst Patrick Berger and Pavel Kucha were drafted in. Both teams were missing such a vast amount of players through injury and suspension that UEFA allowed both sides grace to bring 2 players into the squad. For any small portion of locals remaining sympathetic to Germany winning the tournament, they certainly weren't after Bertie Vogts took UEFA up on the proposal whilst Czech Republic stuck with their initial 22. One of Erin's changes had the ball in the net. Patrick Berger from the penalty spot. Come off the hour, come off the man. Germany, Czechs, Euros finals ending in 6 and penalties. Who said football wasn't cyclical? This final for one, as the match wasn't settled by such means thanks to Oliver Bierhoff finding the net either side of the full-time whistle. The first dragging the match into extra time, the second after an almighty fumble from Petr Kuba, eliciting a premature full-time whistle on 95 minutes, thanks to the golden goal rule. Whilst they hadn't repeated 1976, Czech Republic had stunned everybody by reaching the final. And yet it wasn't the launchpad many had hoped for. In qualifying for France 98, the Czechs fell foul to Yugoslavia being placed into pot 4, and it was they, alongside Spain in a competitive group, that qualified for the World Cup. The Czechs would return to Euro 2000 as dark horses, but were unfortunate in being the first team ejected from the competition after losing to the Dutch via a late penalty and after being competitive with the eventual champions France. By the 2002 World Cup qualifying, it was clear that Pavel Nedved was becoming one of the best players on the planet. Despite that and the Czechs' place as top seeds, they were funnelled into a winnable playoff with Belgium that was lost thanks to a pair of 1-0s. That second leg defeat in Prague was the last time Czech Republic lost until 2004. So what exactly had changed? After elimination, Czech Republic turned to Karel Bruckner, the former under-21s manager. This was a team loaded with potential, added to Nedved were the peak performers in Petr Cech, Thomas Rosicky, Jan Koller and Milan Baros, as well as the experience of Karol Poborský and Vladimír Šmídsa. They dropped just 2 points away in the Netherlands and remained unbeaten throughout this cycle in friendly matches against teams like Italy and France. Whilst their invincible streak was dented with warm-up defeats to Ireland and Japan, the Czechs were in a much better place than 3 years prior. But again, UEFA did them dirty with the group of death for the third successive tournament when they were handed both the Netherlands and Germany. But take a peek through the weight that those two names have in European football and you quite quickly see the cracks. The Czechs had taken 4 points off the Dutch in qualifying, so knew they could beat them. Even Germany, who had participated in the 2002 World Cup final, were deeply flawed and a shell of the team that had pipped the Czechs to the Henri Delaunay Trophy in 1996. With a team featuring the Ballon d'Or holder, Czech Republic were far elevated from their perception in 96, but nobody still truly believed that they could win the tournament or even go far. In fact, the star performer in the group stages was a player nobody saw coming out of the tin. Marek Heinz, the super sub, helped Milan Baros overturn a lead against little old Latvia in the opener, ensuring that they couldn't catch up. Heinz's introduction to the plate kick-started a miraculous comeback in the match of the tournament 4 days later against the Dutch. Netherlands had stormed into a 2-0 goal lead inside of 19 minutes, and whilst Jan Koller edged the Czechs back into the game with a first-half strike, it wasn't until Heinz's introduction that the Dutch were spaghettified into defeat. Baros netted again before Vladimír Šmídsa's winner at the death. Highly entertaining stuff that ensured that the Czech Republic had not only qualified with a game to spare, but they had won the group with a game to spare, thanks to the 3 other teams drawing against one another. Yes, even Germany had been held by Latvia, which could either show just how disgraceful Germany were, how resilient Latvia were, or just how good the 2-1 win for the Czechs over Latvia had been. Either way, they could kick back and relax, a far cry from the hectic conclusion to their group stage 8 years prior. Only Tomáš Galášek remained in the lineup for the third game, and for the third game, Czech Republic fell behind. No matter, Marek Heinz was starting in this match, so he beamed one in after half an hour and clawed back parity for the Czechs. And finally, for the third successive match, a substitute would change Czech fortunes, and for that third successive match, it was Milan Baros who grabbed a goal, the winner on 77 minutes. They might have had to salvage losing situations 3 times and had to rely on their bench a bit too much, but this Czech team were clearly a cut above the rest and above their class of 96, and could afford themselves a break this time round. They were the only team with a 100% record still intact, and by the time they helped close out the quarter-finals in Porto on June the 27th, they could almost be painted as favourites. At the group stage, they had helped to eliminate Germany, but also limping out at the first hurdle were Italy, Spain and Croatia. Then England and France's scalps were claimed in the quarters. It left little old Greece as Czechs' potential semi-final opponents, and one of Netherlands, who they had already beaten, or host Portugal, who were the hosts but a winnable proposition, awaited in the final. Whilst Portugal and Netherlands both needed penalties to get through the final four and Greece reset to their default defensive struggle to eclipse the reigning champions France, the Czechs had a comparative breeze against Denmark on the northern Portuguese coast. Dark horses no more, as Jan Koller headed in and temporary goal machine Milan Baroš bagged 2 in 3 minutes in a 16-minute Czech barrage. It was the second largest victory in Euros knockout history at this stage against a strong opponent too. The Czechs could all but taste the trophy. Returning to the Dragao, Czech Republic, as many predicted, dominated proceedings for the 105 minutes that the match was allowed to traverse. But for all that pressure and possession, Czech hopes were really dashed on 40 minutes when Pavel Nedved was withdrawn through injury. Beyond that, Greece could capably hold their own with some comfort. Then in extra time they began to foray forward. Extra time known as the silver goal period in one of UEFA's more insane ideas. Many had derided the golden goal rule, and rightly so. The Czechs will be at the front of that particular queue after they had lost a European Championship on the rule. UEFA decided to give teams the right of reply. The silver goal was a halfway house between the lunacy of the golden goal rule and the sensible, if a bit boring, normal extra time period. Only 2 silver goals were scored in football history. One in a Champions League qualifier that nobody really remembers. The other, in effect, was a golden goal after Traianos Delas headed in on the front post in the first minute of first half stoppage time. The Czechs, in theory, had a right to reply, but it was still the last touch of the game regardless. Nobody had given the Czechs a chance in 1996, but they made the final. They showed even greater promise, played even better football 8 years later, but bounced out a round earlier to a team playing a dour brand of football that the Czechs had adopted to squeak throughout the knockout stages in 1996. So near but so far away, effectively the Czech footballing motto. Euro 96 made stars of so many footballers. Instantly, Karol Poborský, Vladimír Smicer, Patrik Berger and Pavel Nedved got their transfers to Western Europe via clubs like Manchester United, Lazio and Liverpool. And for the first time since the Czechoslovakian dissolution, they qualified for successive tournaments when they appeared at a first World Cup on their own in 2006. Ultimately, it was a failure, stung by Ghana in the groups. Their loss against eventual champions Italy remains Czech Republic's final World Cup match. By the time the tournament kicks off in the States in 2026, it will be 20 long years. The European Championships, though, has remained a safe haven for Czech football on an international stage. They are one of an exclusive band of nations that have qualified for every Euros in the 21st century, a list that not even England, Belgium or the Netherlands are on. It has been marked by a continued history of failing to lift the trophy, but without even the glamour of producing a great team, world-class players or magical upsets. It has been failure after failure. There was the fantastically cataclysmic 3 goals shipped in the final 15 minutes against Turkey in 2008. There was the topping of the group with a negative goal difference and simply just accepting Portugal roll them over in the quarterfinals of 2012. There was the miserly defensive group exits of 2016 and 2024, and in probably their best performance since 2004, a quarterfinal elimination at the hands of Denmark in 2021. I guess people are surprised when they see Czech teams doing well, but it should not be a surprise. The reality is that we have always been good. Not me, the words of Josef Masopust, probably the greatest Czech footballer ever to have lived. The talent pool may thin out from time to time, and it might not be 1976 every tournament year, but the Czechs are always there, with quality just waiting in the wings to sprout up and be successful and wow us all over again. If you've still got that international break fever, take a look at some of the other videos we've done in this issue on Croatia or on Yugoslavia.